All right. Ooh, that music's loud. Hang on a second. There we go. All right. And my camera is frozen.
It did freeze. You look good though. You look like you're thinking real hard.
All right. Okay. Crazy technical difficulties aside, we are now live. This is Up Your Game. I'm Mike Dunn, the lead tabletop editor of Gaming Trend, and tonight I've got with me Steven Starkey, who has a thing floating in front of... There we go. All right, cool. And we're going to talk about some D&D stuff tonight. Hold on, let me turn this so loud. There we go. Okay. All right. So again, this is Up Your Game. This is the show where we talk about cool stuff and maybe eventually some cool ideas about how to enhance your tabletop gaming experience. Tonight, we are going to talk about... Get my notes here. So we're going to talk about three things tonight. All of them are 5th edition D&D source books and adventure books, and one of them is even a special version. But we're going to talk about the new Icewind Dale Rime of the Frost Maiden adventure that just came out, I guess it was a couple of weeks ago. And we're also going to talk about Mythic Odysseys of Theros, which came out over the summer. That is, I believe, the second 5th edition source book that pulls from the Magic the Gathering lore and setting. And then finally, we're going to look at Beadle and Grimm's Eberron Rising from the Last War Gold Edition. But let's start with Icewind Dale. So, got the book right here. And that's going to be all backwards because I had to change camera views. But it'll be okay in just a minute once we switch to my desk cam. Okay. Alright. So, Icewind Dale is the latest adventure from D&D. It takes place in the very popular Icewind Dale area of the Forgotten Realms. This area was was just super popular back, I guess, was it the early to mid 90s and even into the 2000s. It was the setting for R.A. Salvatore's Crystal Shard Icewind Dale trilogy that started with the Crystal Shard and then led to the various Dark Elf series about one of the main characters, Drizzt Do'Urden. Now, Icewind Dale Rime of the Frost Maiden actually takes place about 100 years after Crystal Shard, the first book. And the one thing I kind of noticed is that there really isn't much mention of Drizzt or the characters from that series, which is fine. I guess we should move on from that eventually. I know there is some passing reference, but it's not as much as I was anticipating. Steven, have you read any of those books, or are you very familiar with Icewind Dale? I mean, I know you're familiar with Icewind Dale.
Yeah, I'm definitely familiar with it. No, I didn't read too many. I've only read a few of the Drizzt books, so I'm aware of Udrist is, read a couple of the novels, talks, a little bit of information about Category and his travels and his history. I thought it was nice that they put this in that setting, and they give it a loose tie-in, so you've got framing, but it's not deep, you know. One of the things that I've dealt with as a dungeon master in Forgotten Realms is having players that know more about the Forgotten Realms than I did. My original setting, and the setting that I played most in when I started out, was Greyhawk, and then I started playing with more Forgotten Realms players. So having an adventure set in the Forgotten Realms that's not deeply tied into that background can give a novice, or at least a neophyte to the Forgotten Realms dungeon master, a little bit of slack to play around with.
So yeah, actually, my first foray into DMing a few years ago was with Forgotten Realms, and I deliberately went in that direction because I was fairly familiar, not as exhaustively familiar as some people are. I mean, people have been writing about and campaigning in the Forgotten Realms setting for decades now. But I actually, as a counterpoint to what you were saying, I actually found that having all of that backstory and having all of that rich lore available through like wikis and, you know, all these various sources, I found it to be fairly invaluable, and made it easy to kind of fold in more interesting things that weren't necessarily in the book, the adventure book that I was using. So real quick, I just want to go through a few things that make this adventure pretty unique for D&D 5th edition. First of all, it's a horror adventure. That was something that was stressed to us by Chris Perkins and the other guy. Refresh my. Oh yeah. You know what? I've got the book. It's Chris Perkins and Jeremy Crawford. Good grief. I am so sorry. It's been a week, folks. It's been a week.
Sure has.
So yeah, the one thing they stressed was that this is a horror story, kind of in the vein of The Thing and Alien, and a lot of like the really suspenseful, you know, humans or main characters against some crazy supernatural or extraterrestrial force. I'm not saying there's extraterrestrials in this. It's just the idea that it's some entity that is more than what you are. There's also a few rules around campaigning in a cold climate. I believe this is the first 5th edition set that does address like a wintry northern climate, much in the same way that like Tomb of Annihilation was focused on jungle adventuring.
That one, and then Ghost of Saltmarsh has the water,
right?
Ships and water. Has more detail about that. So this has then the cold weather.
Yep, indeed. Sure. So, I mean, it's really interesting the way they're doing books with 5th edition. is there's really three different categories of books that they're coming out with, at least in this hardcover format. One is adventures, just like, which is this, Tomb of Annihilation, Descent into Avernus, that sort of thing. Another is like the campaign setting source books, which is, we're going to get into that in a little while with Mythic Odysseys of Theros, and Eberron. Those are both campaign setting books. And then, of course, there's just rules, which is like the Xanathar's Guide. Well, I mean, obviously, Dungeon Master's Guide, Player's Handbook, Monster Manual, that sort of thing. And
upcoming Tasha's Cauldron.
Yeah, Tasha's Cauldron. So I always thought it was pretty interesting. Like back when you and I started playing D&D eons ago, modules, they didn't call them adventure books, they were modules, and they were thin and they were paperback, and it was more like a folder with like a stapled together like kind of booklet, exactly like that. Yes, of course. I should just call you our D&D historian, I think.
I don't know why. Yeah, they were pretty cool because they came with, the cover comes off and you've got your
right
map, and then you've got your adventure. This one has a map book too, illustration booklet, which was not common, but they did have them. So, and then the very, very short adventure.
Yes, and so what you see in these books today would have been like anywhere from like 3 to 5 at minimum of those modules back in the day, I would say. And I know some of the stuff that they've come out with in recent years, like Saltmarsh, has actually culled from those older modules and kind of updated them for the 5th edition rules, which I think is pretty cool. Also, I think there's a company called Goodman Games that has obtained the rights to these original modules, and they are publishing hardcovers of their own in this similar format, where they're updating those old adventures. Kind of want to get my hands on one of those one of these days.
Yeah.
They're even using the original art. It's really cool. But I digress. So usually these books, like if you look right here, you've got an adventure flowchart, and this actually has 7 distinct adventures that form an overarching campaign. And this is pretty typical for what D&D is doing nowadays. Now, I think it's, I guess I'm not really sure in my head. I'm not really sure which method I like more. And it kind of intrigues me that they take this approach instead of coming out with a lot more like products that are more inexpensive, like a less barrier to entry on the cost, as opposed to these. But I do admire the kind of organization that they have around these. They basically come out with one book every quarter, at least that they did this year, right? And at least one of those is going to be the big adventure that they're pushing, and it always ties into Adventurers League. It ties into the new season. Huh?
D&D Celebration.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, so I actually attended one of the epic that they'd set up for the celebration, and it was based in primarily in Tin Towns, which is uh, the the area that you start off at in this adventure. It's it's the many settlements of the inhabitants of Icewind Dale. Um, so, Stephen, how do you feel about their current strategy towards adventures compared to everything that they've done in all of the previous versions?
Right? It is. It's definitely different. I'm really favoring it. I like it. Although interestingly, I like it, but it doesn't match my play style. I think because I played um, you, all of the previous editions, going back to when we started Redbox, like way back. Um, Generally, you have your pile of rules. So you had your Dungeon Master's Guide, Player's Handbook, all those things, and all of the different expansions, especially in when we got to third edition and 3.5. Um, they really got down that here's another pile of rules, more feats, more spells, more magic items. Then they had Frostburn and Storm Rack, or I can't remember what the other one was called. We got it over there. There's Sandstorm, Storm Rack, and Frostburn, which are all these different weather specific rule books that had they came with their own feats and their own rules and special information. And then you had your adventures modules separate, and then you also had your campaign settings and the modules. Like for instance, this one right here, the Tomb of Horrors, was set in one location. It was in Greyhawk originally,
Right.
and then and as they published them, then they would come up with suggestions of where you could stick it into the world. So, if you're playing Forgotten Realms, it would go in this physical location. Um, but what that gave you was you could end up with a disjointed um, set of pre-published adventures that you had to kind of figure out how to get first through second through fifth through 10th. As your characters grew and developed and moved around the world, you kind of had to figure out how to jam these things into the play of what was going on.
Right.
And I felt like it could lead to it put a lot of pressure on the dungeon master to figure out how to plot hook people in, or they ended up kind of getting railroaded in because okay, you guys are 12th level now, and I finally you're at their appropriate level, and I want you to try out White Plume Mountain or whatever.
Right.
And that's over here in the Barrier Peaks, but you guys are down here, so now I got to get you there or whatever. These kind of give you, so you get Icewind Dale, and like you showed right there, what you're showing right now, that flow chart. It's going to start you out at first, and it's going to give you a whole setting all the way through. But what's nice about it is that you still have the ability, if you're used to doing it the other way, of taking little pieces, just taking the one fourth or fifth level adventure and figuring out how to stick it into your world. So you can still do the a la carte kind of select one part out or another part out and stick it into a part of the world. But it is really super friendly for a dungeon master to just buy a hardback book, pull it off of the shelf, and you've got a whole set of adventures that'll last for months of playtime. And it also has some additional information that you can use in other areas as well. New spells, new magic items, and things like that.
Yeah, it just occurred to me that campaign settings typically came in box sets, right? Yeah, pull one out. Go for it. Go for it.
I think the only one that I have handy is the Spelljammer campaign.
Yes.
Here, the Spelljammer, it's a box, and it opens up, and then it has a bunch of books and a bunch of extra maps.
Yeah.
Box sets.
So I think it's great that these new books basically give a DM everything they need to run in at least that part of the setting. Like, you don't have to have a Forgotten Realms box set in addition to this book, or even, I mean, there were so many supplements, especially like second edition. I know third edition got really hardcore, but third edition is actually the only version of D&D I have never played. Yeah,
Missed
that
that decade.
yeah, it was right when my son was born, so right when Griffin was born, and let's just say I was way too broke and way too busy to have anything to do with anything.
Right.
So,
I understand that.
but it's like I'm definitely partial to for Forgotten Realms. I have run a significant chunk of the Tomb of Annihilation, which which I kind of gravitated to right off the bat, because it was basically a spiritual successor to to not Tomb of Annihilation. It was Tomb of Horrors. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Which was a module that I remember we all like loved looking at, but I don't think any one of us ever actually played through it.
No, I've owned this for decades, and I don't think that we ever actually ran this one.
Yeah. And that Tomb of Horrors is just one sliver of the Tomb of Annihilation book.
Right.
So, also basically the book will give you everything you need, including like a large fold-out map that you can remove in the back of the area. It provides creatures that are indigenous to the area that supplement the core monsters from Monster Manual and Volo's Guide and that sort of thing. And occasionally they throw in some new rules, some things that they're trying. And this is something that I think we're going to talk more about here in a second when we talk about Mythic Odysseys of Theros. But like, I feel like these books and the campaign setting books are a way for them to test out some ideas in the wild, stuff that maybe has caught on in their Unearthed Arcana, which is their kind of beta testing of new rules and new ideas that they've gotten set up for 5th edition, which I think is absolutely brilliant. But there's actually one new thing in here, if I can find it, that I thought was really cool, and it's tied into kind of the horror concept of the adventure, and that is, it's got to be right before creatures. Secrets. Yes, character secrets. So these are ways to add more background and kind of enhance role playing, where you provide a secret that is tied into the setting that your players have. So like, for instance, this one secret right here, you can hand one of your players this card. Doppelganger, I'm a shape changer. I have none of the traits of the race I'm imitating, but I retain my class features, background and alignment, etc. So like right away you can give each of your characters some like deep dark secret that they don't want anyone else in the party to know about, and might be a great hook for the DM to kind of drive the narrative a little bit more. I've kind of done these things a little independently on my own, but I think there's a really nice. Oh, look, there's a Dritz reference right there. I think it's a really nice idea, and I'd like to see it, maybe have a little bit more life outside of just this adventure.
Yeah, oh, definitely. Well, they even say that. So in the very beginning, under character creation, whenever they reference the secrets, it says that it has secrets that you can cut out, photocopy, whatever, and make them available in your home campaign. Which, so clearly the idea is that, and that's something that Jeremy Crawford is saying a lot, is, take this idea, put it in your game, and run with it. And whatever is useful to you, these are basically toolboxes for you to take and use. I think that this harkens back to what we were talking about earlier about how in previous editions when you bought a book, it tended to be one thing. So here's your adventure. They may have a couple new monsters, but it's just the adventure. Or this is your set of rules, this is your campaign setting, and so forth. And here you kind of have all of that rolled up into one. You've got the adventure, you've got all of these ready-made characters, you have things like this, the secrets. And so buying one, even if I never play the Ghost of Saltmarsh hardcover book, even if I never run that adventure, I've already got ideas from it that I've pulled and stuck into my own campaign. They're already there, so you can find a use for it.
I actually think Ghosts of Saltmarsh is designed more as these are like 4 distinct chunks that you can slot in anywhere, as opposed to there being like one big overarching campaign. But they do give hooks for that as well, right? It's just not as...
I was just talking about the nautical mechanics and the nautical setting.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. But going to the secrets, though, yeah, you definitely can... I think that one of the things that new players especially, but players in general kind of struggle with is that background, developing backgrounds for characters. Some people, and they write the novel background, but a lot of people gloss over it. At least that's been my experience, that somebody's background is as much as I'm an orphan kind of thing, and then that's it. And this can really feed into helping to create an interesting background, because the secrets they're skeletons in your closet, right? And that is part of your background. So
totally.
Are giving seeds of thought there.
And I definitely look at all of these adventures as like I'm very unlikely to run this whole thing like cover to cover. First of all, if I did, it would probably take a couple of years. I know we didn't even get through all of Tomb of Annihilation over the course of a full year, and we played 3 like almost every week. That said, one of the other cool things about how things are set up these days is you now have the Dungeon Masters Guild, and a lot of additional content, a lot of supplementary content starts coming from players and dungeon masters out there to add on to it. I did a lot of that with Tomb of Annihilation as well. I found a bunch of like little... Well, like there's this whole stretch of the jungle where you're basically kind of grinding as you work your way down the continent through the jungle. And the book largely abstracts that. And so, like, I spent the first few sessions kind of rolling percentile dice on the encounter tables, but that got kind of stale, and I couldn't necessarily rush too far ahead because I needed to level up my players. So I found a bunch of extra content on the Dungeon Masters Guild that was literally tied in to certain hooks within the Tomb of Annihilation hardcover.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frost Maiden. I'm going to put a link to that in the chat.
Yeah, before we close out on it, I know we got to move on to the next topic, but I just wanted to say that I think one of the interesting things about this is the fact that it's a horror adventure.
Agreed.
Like they pointed out and stressed it, but that's not super common in the history of D&D. I mean, they've been around for sure, and some people. I mean, you can run an entire horror setting if you want. And if you look in all the different monster manuals and folios through the years, there are definitely some pretty horrific monsters. And I
Look at
ran
that.
a short-lived campaign that was horror-based, but in order to make it more horror themed and to really draw that out, I relied on the Chill RPG.
Oh yeah.
It's a horror themed RPG. I used that setting and RPG. That's a whole game system, but I used that to help define and drive how the D&D game went, because D&D, it took a little bit more work to make it more horror. So having them come out with a horror branded or horror themed concept, I think that's bringing something new and fresh into the D&D structure that we haven't seen much of before.
I totally agree, and I mean I've done that too. Like I think other great possibilities for doing that a few years back were like the White Wolf publications, like Vampire the Masquerade, Werewolf, that sort of thing, as well as Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah, there was a Vampire Dark Ages, I think.
Right.
Took Vampire and took it into the Dark Ages, and then you could use that to tie into a medieval D&D style kind of campaign.
Yep.
It's meshing two different rules, but at least that gives you some ideas on how to set up horror. Because even this one, Tomb of Horrors, isn't a horror campaign.
Right.
The horrors they're talking about is how terrible you die over and over and over again. Right?
So it's more torture porn than horror.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So a game with a horror that is horror themed, I think, is really. I was really excited when I heard that. I thought that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And something that a lot of dungeon masters could use to bring horror into their campaign.
And actually, there's another thing in here that can inform other adventures and actually kind of helps us segue into the next book we're going to be looking at, and that is the fact that the Frost Maiden, the titular Frost Maiden in the book, is a deity. It's a minor deity, and so this encounter, the way it's structured, especially towards the later phases of it, can provide a good template for how to how your players can battle and interact with a deity. So, on that note, we have, and this is again backwards for you, we have Mystic Odysseys of Theros. Now, Mythic. Yes. Now, so, this is a very interesting book. Now, Theros is a setting in Magic the Gathering. And I've got to admit, I mean, I have the Ravnica book. I've played Magic the Gathering a little bit over the years, off and on. I even played the computer versions of it. I never got terribly deeply invested into the lore and settings of Magic the Gathering. So this book was kind of a new experience for me. Now, of course, it's basically Greek gods and heroes, just with slightly different names, and it's like an alternate reality version of the Greek gods and heroes. And I was actually, when I was looking through the book, I was actually pleasantly surprised at how familiar some of these concepts were, and yet how fresh they were at the same time. So it is a setting campaign book. It's less a campaign book and more of a setting book.
It's definitely, yeah, it's a setting.
Yeah. So there's a lot about the realm of Theros and the sub realms within it. But a good portion of this book focuses on new rules around gods, how they're worshipped, and how they interact with characters. So, for instance, and that impacts a lot of things. Like, it impacts character creation. You've got heroic drive and heroic destiny, kind of taking up that concept of, a hero with a patron god, kind of looking upon them and sending them out to do their bidding. You've got some very, very familiar kind of races. You've got the Leonin, Satyr, Minotaur, Triton. You've got some subclass options that are appropriate for the theme: the Bard, College of Eloquence, and the Oath of Glory Paladin. But really, I think the thing that really struck me about this book was all the stuff around deities. And I think part of the reason for that is one of the first D&D book I ever saw, the first D&D book I ever purchased, was that original first printing of Deities and Demigods, which I don't own anymore, unfortunately. But the Deities and Demigods and pretty much most of the source books, like in first and second edition, that were about gods, kind of approached it in the same way as like a monster manual. It's like, here are your gods, here's their pantheon, here are their stats. Oh, and here's a little chapter about like the different planes that gods live in, and a few other kind of ancillary ideas. This does go through several deities in the Theros mythos, but it gives you things like that deity's influence, their goals, their divine relationships, how worshippers worship that god, tables to determine that god's favors, various myths about those gods, that sort of thing. And I looked at this and I was thinking, like, this is a good template to use if you wanted to bring maybe a new Deities and Demigods volume into the 5th edition. I also know that I think it was Jetpack 5. I think it's Jetpack 5. It's either Jetpack 5 or Jetpack 9. They came out with a book of gods. It's a third party. They came out with their own 5th edition supplement called Gods and Goddesses, and it kind of took that same approach that the original Deities and Demigods took, with it being like a stats book. But one of the things that I've always felt has been a bit undefined in D&D, at least in my experience, is you have these classes, clerics and paladins, and these classes that are deeply focused on deities, on worshiping a deity. They obtain their abilities from deities, but there's not much there to guide a player on how to play a worshiper of a deity. And there's not a lot of rigor around the rules around that. It's just, oh, you get spells, or you get
Right? Yeah,
feats or abilities, or subclasses, that sort of thing.
absolutely. When you look at what has been provided in the past, it's a very light brush of here's the pantheon of gods, and they have their different. So you got a god of water, god of death, a god of this, god of nature, and they have their domains that your cleric then can use to cast their spells and so forth. And that's changed over time and really developed depth, and they've modified it a lot with each edition. But even up into this edition, there's not a whole lot about the religion, really. So
Right.
so you have a cleric, you have a paladin, and the druids almost have a better religion, in that at least you can kind of say, well, I'm going to look at what druids do.
Mm-hmm.
I trying to figure out what a cleric does is a bit of a challenge. And some players take it and run with it. I've had players that are they'll just make up stuff.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, I'm got to set up an altar and I got to do my my daily walk around this stick 7 times, and you're like, okay, well that's what you're going to do, which is really great because a lot of that stuff just isn't there.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, and I mean,
go ahead.
it's there's just not a lot stuff, not a lot out there for players to draw from, and I feel like there's a lot of possibility there, like especially for role playing, right? One of the things that I tried to encourage in the campaign that I mentioned earlier, the Tomb of Annihilation one, like if we had a bard, I wouldn't expect them to, sing every time they cast a spell, but if they took that effort, I would weave it into the narrative and make everything just much stronger in terms of that. And if a paladin like charges into battle and yells out a battle cry to their deity as they face uncertain fate, I don't know, it really enhances the playing experience for everyone at the table, not just that player and not just me as a DM.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, there's a few other things in this book. Of course, there's Mythic Monsters. These are basically analogs to monsters from the Greek and Roman mythologies. They're just a little different. But I love this picture right here. That's a great picture. And then, of course, there's supernatural gifts and prophecies, god weapons, all kinds of cool stuff. I think, and it's really funny. It's like I look at this book and I'm not thinking Magic the Gathering really at all. I'm thinking of how I can use these rules to beef up religion and clerics and paladins and deities and kind of ramp up the kind of epic destiny quality of the narratives that I'm working on. You have a little more familiarity with Magic the Gathering and the settings than I do, Stephen. What can you tell me about Theros?
So yeah, this is one of the settings that I don't know that much about, though,
Oh,
unfortunately.
okay.
So I played Magic a lot, and I've read about a bunch of the settings and some of the fiction that they published, but I didn't play during Theros. So
Gotcha. I
yeah.
mean, I really like that Wizards of the Coast and D&D are doing this. Like
Oh yeah.
it's like a no-brainer to include Magic the Gathering in D&D. It's like a Reese's peanut butter cup, two great tastes that taste great together. Um, I just
Yeah. Well, I was going to say that, yeah, and I think that one of the two times that they've pulled over, and actually I think there's been some other stuff in the Unearthed Arcana and other areas where they've had information that they've brought over from Magic into D&D. And
That makes sense.
there's definitely some challenges there between, like, Magic is it's focused on the planeswalkers and what the planeswalkers can do, and that doesn't translate well into Dungeons and Dragons. But a lot of the campaign stuff can. And what I really like about this one is that the Dungeons and Dragons generic homebrew setting, or Faerun and Greyhawk and those other settings is, first there were gods, and the gods created the world and made the elves and the dwarves and so forth. And so, and the dwarves worship Moradin and so on.
Mm-hmm.
This one reverses that. People were there first, and people made the gods, and the gods came into being because people worshipped them.
Mm.
And I think that that's an interesting take. It's the first one that I know of that first in a D&D setting that has defined that as part of the setting. And that, I think, is where you get that thinking outside of the box, or approaching the problem from a different angle, because it's coming from the Magic the Gathering IP, and bringing it into the
Right.
D&D IP, and they go, how are we going to work this, and how are we going to make what's already written and exists here work here for this rule set and these players. And I really like that, because that makes me think about my homebrew setting, which is there were the gods and then they made the people. And I'm like, yeah, but it doesn't have to be that way. So how could I change things, tweak it a little bit?
Right.
And what can I pull out of here and stick into there?
Now, Stephen, I know you've been working on your homebrew setting for quite some time, and I know you've done a lot of homebrew stuff over the years. I remember you doing quite a bit of that when we were in high school together. But like, when was the last time you actually ran a game in, say, Forgotten Realms or Greyhawk or another setting, not your own?
I have not run a published setting in probably 20 years.
Wow.
Like a long time. Yeah, I've run some one shots though, or just like I've got a group of players, especially when I was in the army. I grab a group of players. We would play for a little bit, for a month or two, and just run. And those were, like, usually it was just a module. So
Right.
yeah. So, and actually, these hardback modules have been really intriguing me. I'm kind of like, I'd like to set a homebrew aside for a while and just run through one of these modules, just from beginning to end, rather than what I tend to do, which is pick it apart and take my favorite stuff out.
Yeah, I think I kind of took the opposite route, because the first time I DM'd was about a couple of years ago, a little over 2 years ago. I'd always just been a player before that, and so I chose to run from one of the adventure books, partially because, like, I already didn't know what the hell I was doing, and I needed all the help I could get. But as we got towards the end of what I called the season, which is when we had to stop playing because I had to move. Like, as I got further away from that, I realized that I wanted to customize things a lot more, but still have a lot to draw from in the Forgotten Realms, and I'd also gotten a few more books by that point, and I was like, ooh, I like the Dungeon of the Mad Mage. Maybe I should figure out a way to shift over to that, and pick out some of my favorite bits from that. But I don't know. I don't know if I'll ever take the plunge to just go whole hog and create a new world from scratch, and everything that goes with that. I feel a little spark of desire to do that in me. It's just daunting as hell.
Right, I know, right? And there's two different ways to approach it, and deciding on which way you're going to go. Do I start big and work my way down, or do I start small and work my way up? Both of them have their own problems inherent in them. We should do a discussion on the different resources that are available historically and currently for doing that kind of stuff. Maybe.
Oh yeah.
That might be a future topic.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, I've got one more thing to look at. We're actually running a little longer today than I thought we would. This baby. Eberron, Rising from the Last War. Gold Edition. Now, Eberron, if I recall, was a setting that came out during 3rd edition, correct?
Yeah, they had a competition. And
That's
people
right.
put in their proposed settings, and this setting won. And they worked with, I'm drawing a blank, but they worked with the guy that wrote it, and then he became a dude. So I'll think of it in just a second here.
Yeah, and so here's the regular book for Eberron, Rising of the Last War, the regular edition. So this is pretty interesting from Beadle and Grimm's. Every set that they've come out with before this one, and this one actually came out in the spring, and they sent it to me basically right after the pandemic shutdown hit. Everything was chaos, and I feel bad because usually they sell out of these pretty quickly. Luckily, they haven't sold out of this one. You can still get the gold edition from their site, and I'll put the link in shortly. But this is the first set that they did for a like a campaign setting source book.
Yeah.
So it's a little more. It's a. I wouldn't say it's less focus, but it doesn't have the laser focus with everything that comes in it that it usually comes with an adventure set, right?
And a Beadle and Grimm's product.
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm gonna take a look at some of this. So I actually think that makes a lot of what's in this box considerably more adaptable to the game that you're playing. Obviously, Eberron, you're in Eberron if you're doing this, but so let me pull some of this out here. So I guess let's start with the books. So one of the key things about the Beadle and Grimm sets is that they take a book like this, one volume, and they break it up into several chapter volumes, which can be kind of handy in that like I've only really experienced this in terms of the adventure stuff, but like each chapter of an adventure book is basically a group of encounters or like whatever levels you are. So
Right.
it makes sense. The breakup makes sense. This is a little more interesting in that they break it up according to the different resources that they provide in the book. Like, here's the Welcome to Eberron and character creation. The Corvair Gazetteer, which I believe is about the lands. Yes, it's about the lands of Eberron.
That's chapter 2 of the book.
Yeah. And so on and so forth. Building Eberron adventures. I actually think the split doesn't make as much sense as it does in the other sets. But it's still kind of nice in that you can just, instead of like thumbing through the large book, you can just pull this out, and you know, maybe in some cases it's easier to show things to your players. But yeah, that's one of the cool things that they do. You also get an Eberron specific DM screen. Everything's so glossy.
It is.
So, you know, Eberron specific tables and little snippets of information. This is actually, they do this for every set as well, and I actually think there's a lot more utility for a general Eberron screen than an adventure focused screen, right? Because this is something you can use for, you know, multiple campaigns.
Yep, definitely.
And that's kind of the same way with these maps and handouts. Let's see. Got several. Now the battle maps, I believe, correspond to 4 original encounters that were made specifically for this set that you don't get in the standard book. So beautiful, like lovely textured paper, what beautifully printed, you know, perfect scale for if you're using minis, that sort of thing. Great battle maps. Got several of them, including an airship. Oh, so big. So yeah. And again, these are things that come in really handy, you know, if you're running in the Eberron setting, no matter what campaign. And then let's see. You've also got some handouts, like you've got the Planes of Existence, the Cosmology of Eberron. You've got, and these are generally keyed towards the adventures that come with it as well. I'm trying to find something. You've got the Korenberg Chronicle. You've got these periodicals that are things that you can hand your players. And I just think, like, these are easily adaptable as well, and adds a lot of nice flavor for the setting. You've got some campaign maps. So these are not like the battle maps where they're scaled to the 28 millimeter miniatures. These are actual campaign maps of like, things that are central to the setting. This is Old Sharn. Oh, Sharn, City of Towers. That's right. Yes. So you've got that. You've got handouts. Deluxe campaign maps. You've got broadsheet. The handouts include broadsheets, which is like the paper, the periodicals. You've got patron letters, which, as I understand it, patrons are a big part of Eberron.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, and that patrons is an excellent example of something that's super useful in one campaign, and you can drag it into another.
Right.
And we're going to see patrons in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. They have taken that concept out, made it campaign setting agnostic, and stuck it in there. So we're going to see it again.
Yeah, there's actually a few concepts from this book, this set, that have kind of graduated into the full-blown D&D proper, campaign setting agnostic rules. Another thing that Beadle and Grimm does that I really love are these encounter cards. And so you've got an image on one side, like an image of the creature on one side. It's kind of a fold over so that you can hang it over your DM screen. So your players see this, and the DM sees this, which is the stats and description for the creature.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so there's tons of these. And then this is something a little unique to this one. These are magic item cards. And if you saw the show last week, I was looking at some animated spell cards, and these actually kind of remind Deck of Many, yes, Deck of Many. And these are actually, these look like the same kind of style of cards that Gale Force 9 has for magic items and spell cards. But these are, of course, Eberron specific. Now, my one criticism of these is, you've got the same card back, but all you've got is descriptions. You don't really have any images. Still helpful, nice. But it would have been nice. Like, I don't know if it makes sense to have the same card back on these as opposed to having an image of the item on it.
The Gale Force 9 cards are similar.
Yeah.
They don't always have an image. A lot of them, it's just a card.
Oh.
And then the information. But some of them have images, but a lot of them don't.
Yeah, I've got a bunch of I've got the monster cards and the spellbook cards. Oh, you know what? I think you're right. Like, here's an item card, one of the Gale Force 9s. So this is a Wand of War, and then that. So, like, I would have thought they would have gone with this direction. And then let's see. There's a few other like groovy little things that were in the box as well. So we've got these Dragon Mark temporary tattoos.
Oh, cool.
Now, I don't really know much of anything about the Dragon Mark stuff. Like I've read through some of the Eberron book, but I must admit there's a lot of. It was so not Forgotten Realms at the time that I was reading it that I wasn't sure I wanted to like confuse the information in my brain that much more already. But what exactly are dragon marks, Stephen?
The dragon marks are they're all the same. Like if you have a dragon mark, it is a specific one. So those
Gotcha.
temporary tattoos to represent like it's like the mark of finding or the mark of what's a good one, the mark of healing. And people that have
Yeah.
that mark, if you have the mark, first of all, then you're in that house. So each one of the dragon marks is a house, and then those people that have those marks or are in those houses then kind of corner the market on that thing. So the healing marked people then kind of run healing.
Right.
Hospitality marked people run like all the inns in the world.
Gotcha.
I think they're also race specific too. Like elves have certain marks, but not others.
So are they more of like a social status thing as opposed to like this will give you a special ability?
No, it gives you special ability too. So,
Oh, okay. That's cool.
And what's interesting is in the old one, or not the old one, but the first production run, 3.0, 3.5, or the 3.0 version of the game, there were different levels of the dragon marks. So there was like the baby one, it was just like kind of those. And then there was like a medium one that's more complicated, and like a super duper one that took up like your whole chest. And it has the same design in the center, and it just kind of grew out from there. And I don't remember it being in this. Maybe it's something they would do in the future, or if they referenced it, I don't remember. I haven't played this yet. I've only read through it. But yeah, that's how the dragon marks work. I think it's really cool that you could put a dragon mark tattoo on. And
yeah, I suppose that's better than putting like a tattoo pin in here. You know, that might be a little weird. So there's another thing that's related to dragons, and that's this bag of dragon shards. And it comes with 3 dragon shards, and also a little kind of leather band that you can kind of tie them all together. Now, as I understand it, these are also pretty big deal in Eberron as well. Do you know anything about those?
Yeah, I can't remember though. I'd hate to say something that caused like Twitter to explode, but yeah, dragon shards are actual things that you can get. They're scattered around the world, but I don't remember the details.
Gotcha. And then finally, a feather token, which I haven't taken out of the package. Let me take it out here. And this is basically just like a pin.
Feather token?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, that's the gold edition of Beadle and Grimm's gold edition of Eberron Rising from the Last War. And
I love those editions. I mean, they definitely are dear. You're gonna pay for it when you buy it.
Oh yeah,
they are super nice.
Yeah, like this set is $250.
So I wonder. I haven't been. Can you get that stuff separately? Kind of like when they came out with the Baldur's Gate one, you could get soul coins from their store. Could you get a feather token individually?
I think after they sell out of an edition, they will make mostly according to like what people are asking for, or what they think is cool to put on their site. They have there is an ad for it in here, if I can find it. They have a section on their website where you can just purchase some of these props a la carte, like the soul coin. and I know they've had some other pins and other editions that you could purchase. I will say this, knowing that the Platinum edition of Rime of the Frost Maiden is imminent, supposed to ship sometime this month. After reading through Rime of the Frost Maiden and realizing how de-emphasized the original heroes of Tin Towns and Dritz Do'Urden were, I personally was kind of hoping for a Gwynethar figurine to come with that set.
That would be cool.
Oh well. Missed opportunity, Beadles and Grimms.
Yeah. Maybe in the next.
So besides all that, again, it comes with 4 encounters. And it comes with an Adventurers League certificate and an Adventurers League bonus encounter. So, and that's something that they do tie in a lot to as well. So I'm going to actually put both of those links in chat. I'll put... Nope, that's not the right one. So you can still purchase this set off of their site. And put that link in right now. And I'm also going to put a link into the core book. All right. So yeah, that's what I've got for tonight. I have a feeling we're going to be looking at more source books in future episodes. I know there are a few third-party source books that I think would be interesting to focus on, such as Deck of Many's campaign setting Humblewood, as well as Matt Colville's Strongholds and Followers, and he's actually got a second source book that he kickstarted that should be coming out any day now. Probably in a couple of months, actually, now that I think about it. But there is so much material out there for DMs and players now. It's ridiculous. And not only the stuff that's coming out now for 5th edition, but a lot of the stuff like what you have on your shelves, Stephen, from previous editions, you can still pull some great ideas and great mechanics and great adventures into your current 5th edition campaign. Honestly, with less effort than it might take. If there's special rule situations that that existed then, like say in 3.5, that don't exist in 5, I'm sure 5 is mature enough now, I think, to where you could probably extrapolate pretty handily some of that old stuff. I don't know. What do you think, Stephen?
Yeah, definitely. It's after 4, 5 is so much easier to drag old information forward. So when playing 4, which I struggled with and didn't play a lot because it was so different from the previous editions, going back to it, I got like 6 shelves here of D&D books going all the way back through time, and I just couldn't reference them and use them as easily because I struggled with rules mismatches and how's this going to work.
Right.
And then coming into 5, there's enough of 3 and prior editions. There's enough there's enough of that structure, that genetic heritage in there, that grabbing something from one of the older books and bringing it forward, you can hammer it in there.
Right.
They're more like square pegs and mostly square holes.
And you can actually find a lot of those old source books in PDF format on the Dungeon Masters Guild as well.
Absolutely.
Not to mention, like, there's wikis galore that have been building content for as long as the internet has been around. So,
yeah.
But yeah, I would like to thank D&D and Wizards of the Coast and Beadle and Grimm's for providing this product for us to look at tonight. I imagine we'll probably be doing an episode on Tasha's Cauldron of Everything when that comes out. And that one might actually be worth just spending a whole episode on. I think it's based on what they've told us, based on what little they teased for the beginning of Adventurers League this season. I think it's probably one of the most significant additions of rules to the core game that we've seen in a while.
Yeah, I agree. I'm really looking forward to it.
But yeah, and Stephen, thank you for joining me tonight. And
Thanks for the invite.
And yeah, I hope everybody checks out these books. Has a great time playing with them. This has been Up Your Game. I'm Mike Dunn with Steve Starkey, and we'll see you next week.
See you later.